Move your pathetic old carcass out of the way. This is a no-loitering zone. The security guard snarled, towering over Edwin Hawkins, an 88-year-old Vietnam veteran using a walker decorated with military patches. Before Hawk could explain, he was simply resting before meeting his grandson. The guard violently shoved him. Hawk's frail body crashed against the polished mall floor, his prosthetic leg twisting unnaturally as his medals scattered. 12 minutes later, as terrified shoppers recorded the aftermath, 6 unmarked SUVs screeched to a halt outside Westfield Plaza. The mall's security cameras captured what happened next. 16 elite operators from the most secretive unit in. The military surrounded the building, led by a man whose silver stars gleamed under the fluorescent lights. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Edwin Hawkins adjusted his worn, navy blue Vietnam veterans and gap as he navigated the bustling Westfield Plaza Mall on a busy Saturday afternoon. At 88, his movements were measured and deliberate, each step with his walker a testament to decades of resilience. The metal frame was adorned with military patches and a small American flag that fluttered gently with each step. A purple heart pin gleamed on his neatly pressed flannel shirt alongside a combat infantryman badge. Quiet symbols of sacrifices most modern shoppers hurrying past him would never fully comprehend. Hawk had come to the mall for a specific purpose: to meet his grandson, Lieutenant Commander James Hawkins, who was home on leave from his naval deployment. They had planned to have lunch at the food court and then visit the military surplus store, where James wanted to buy his grandfather a new display case for his medals. It was a rare occasion for the family to be together, and Hawk had arrived early, wanting to ensure he wouldn't keep his grandson waiting. The journey from the mall entrance to their meeting spot had proven more challenging than anticipated. The weekend crowd was dense, and Hawk found himself frequently stopping to catch his breath. His prosthetic left leg, a replacement for the limb he'd lost to a Viet Cong booby trap in 1968, was causing him more discomfort than usual. The phantom pain, a constant companion for over 5 decades, seemed particularly acute today. Hawk spotted an empty bench near the central fountain and decided to rest momentarily. He'd still arrive at the food court 10 minutes early at this rate. As he carefully maneuvered toward the bench, he felt a sharp twinge in his hip, the old shrapnel wounds making their presence known. He paused, grimacing slightly, inadvertently blocking a portion of the wide corridor. Most people flowed around him with the casual accommodation of everyday courtesy. A young mother with a stroller smiled as she passed. An elderly couple nodded in silent understanding of mobility challenges. A teenager politely asked if he needed help, which Hawk declined with a warm smile and a gentle, "Thank you, young man, but I can manage." That's when he heard the voice behind him, sharp, impatient, and unnecessarily loud. "Hey! You can't stop here! Keep moving!" Hawk turned slowly, his weathered face calm despite the rudeness of the command. Standing before him was a security guard, no older than 30, with a name tag reading Trent Morris on his crisp uniform. The young man's face was set in lines of irritation, his posture radiating an inflated sense of authority. "I'm just resting a moment, son," Hawk explained, gesturing to his walker and prosthetic leg. "I'll be moving along to meet my grandson in a minute." The security guard's eyes narrowed, his gaze not even acknowledging the military insignia on Hawk's cap or the patches on his walker. "This isn't a rest home, old-timer. Mall policy states no loitering in the main walkways. You're creating a hazard." A small cluster of shoppers had slowed, sensing the unnecessary confrontation brewing. A middle-aged woman frowned at the guard's tone. "I'm not loitering, young man," Hawk replied. his voice carrying the quiet dignity that had served him through firefights and field hospitals alike. "I'm a patron of this mall, taking a momentary break before continuing to the food court where I plan to spend money at your establishments." This reasonable explanation seemed to irritate the guard further. Trent stepped closer, invading Hawk's personal space, his hand moving to rest meaningfully on his belt near his radio. "Listen, I don't care who you're meeting or what war you claim to have fought in," Trent said, glancing dismissively at Hawk's veteran cap. "Rules are rules. Either start moving or I'll have to escort you out." An older man in the growing audience of onlookers spoke up. "Give him a break, officer. Can't you see he's a veteran?" Trent shot the man a warning look. "Stay out of this. Sir, mall security matters aren't your concern." Hawk, not wanting to create a scene, began to maneuver his walker to continue his journey. "No need for trouble. I'll be on my way." As he attempted to turn, his prosthetic leg caught on the walker's frame, a rare misstep for someone who had adapted to his disability decades ago. He momentarily lost balance, his right hand reaching out instinctively to steady himself against the nearest object, which happened to be Trent's uniform sleeve. The touch, light as it was all the provocation the security guard needed. "Don't put your hands on me," Trent snapped, jerking away with unnecessary force. "That's assault on security personnel. I was just trying to keep from falling." "Son," Hawk explained calmly, regaining his balance. "No need to. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Move your pathetic old carcass out of the way. This is a no-loitering zone," Trent snarled, his face flushing with what appeared to be a combination of embarrassment at being the center of attention and anger at having his authority questioned. The sudden escalation shocked the onlookers. A teenage girl had already begun recording with her smartphone, sensing the wrongness of what was unfolding. Hawk's expression remained composed, though his eyes, still sharp despite his years, reflected disappointment rather than fear. "Young man," Hawk began, in the same measured tone he had used to calm, panicked young soldiers in the jungle decades ago, "I understand you have a job to do, but there's no call for—" He never finished the sentence. Trent, perhaps sensing his losing position in the court of public opinion gathering around them, made a catastrophic decision. With a sudden, violent motion, he shoved Hawk's chest with both hands. The force, which might have merely unbalanced a younger man, sent the 88-year-old veteran crashing backward. Hawk's walker clattered away across the polished floor. His body, weathered by age and old injuries, had no chance of maintaining equilibrium. He fell hard, his prosthetic leg twisting at an unnatural angle, partially detaching from the socket. The contents of his pockets scattered, a wallet, keys, and a small velvet pouch containing 3 medals he had planned to show his grandson, including a silver star and 2 purple hearts. The sound of his body hitting the floor seemed to echo through the suddenly silent corridor. For a terrible moment no one moved. Hawk lay still, the wind knocked out of him, his cap fallen from his head revealing thin white hair. A small trickle of blood began to form where his elbow had scraped against the floor. The silence broke with an outburst of horrified exclamations. From the crowd, a nurse who had been shopping rushed to Hawk's side. 2 young men stepped between the fallen veteran and the security guard, whose face had transitioned from anger to shock as the reality of what he'd done began to register. "What is wrong with you?" a woman shouted at Trent. "He's an elderly veteran." "Someone call 911, another voice called out. "I've got it all on video," the teenage girl announced, her phone still recording. "Every second." Trent's radio crackled as another security guard, having spotted the commotion on the mall's security cameras, called for an update. With shaking hands, Trent raised the radio to his mouth. "Situation under control. Medical assistance needed at Center Court." It was a lie, and everyone present knew it. The situation was far from under control. What no one realized in that moment, however, was that this incident would trigger a response unlike anything the Westfield Plaza Mall had ever seen. Meanwhile, Hawk lay on the floor, momentarily dazed but conscious. The nurse had advised him not to move until paramedics arrived. His weathered hand reached out, not for assistance, but for something far more precious to him, the small velvet pouch containing his medals. An elderly woman gently placed it back in his palm, and his fingers closed around it with surprising strength. "Are you all right, sir?" the nurse asked, checking his pulse. Hawk's eyes, clear blue despite his years, focused on her with remarkable lucidity. "I've had worse landings jumping out of helicopters, ma'am," he replied, his voice steady despite the pain evident in the lines of his face. "But I would appreciate some help getting back up." "Sir, you should really wait for the paramedics," she cautioned. Hawk nodded slightly, acquiescing to her professional opinion. His gaze then shifted to the security guard, who was now backing away from the hostile crowd. There was no anger in the veteran's expression, only a profound sadness. Not for himself, but for what the young man's actions represented. What happened next would be described in dozens of social media posts, several viral videos, and eventually local and national news reports. It began with a simple action that would have far-reaching consequences. A middle-aged man in casual, business attire who had witnessed everything, stepped away from the crowd and made a phone call. The man was David Chen, a retired Marine Corps major who now worked as a civilian contractor for the Department of Defense. He wasn't a close friend of Edwin Hawkins, but he knew exactly who the fallen veteran was. Any Marine who had studied special operations history knew the name Hawkins, one of the legendary members of MACV-SOG, the highly classified special operations group that had conducted some of the most dangerous missions of the Vietnam War. Chen's phone call wasn't to 911, though someone else had already made that call. Instead, he dialed a number few civilians would recognize, a direct line to a special veterans response network established by former special operators to provide immediate assistance to veterans in crisis. "Code Silver, Westfield Plaza Mall," Chen said crisply into his phone. MACV-SOG operative Edwin Hawkins, 88, physically assaulted by security personnel. Currently down, minor injuries apparent. Situation volatile. Local authorities en route. The response was immediate and concise. Acknowledged. Assets in vicinity. Response time 11 minutes. Maintain observation. Out. Chen pocketed his phone and returned his attention to the scene. Mall security reinforcements had arrived. 2 additional guards, looking uncertain about how to proceed given the clearly inappropriate actions of their colleague. Trent was now standing against the wall, his earlier bravado replaced by growing apprehension as the crowd continued to document the incident and express their outrage. The center court of Westfield Plaza had transformed into an impromptu community of support around the fallen veteran. Someone had retrieved Hawk's walker and cap. A bottle of water appeared, offered by a concerned shop owner. A retired nurse had joined the first, both monitoring Hawk's vital signs while waiting for professional medical help. Hawk himself remained remarkably composed. When able to sit up with assistance, he thanked each person who helped him with the genuine warmth and courtesy that had characterized his entire life, both in and out of uniform. He declined offers to call family members. "My grandson will be here soon enough," he explained. "No need to worry him ahead of time." What Hawk didn't say, what only Chen and a few others with military backgrounds might have guessed, was exactly who his grandson was. Lieutenant Commander James Hawkins was not just any naval officer. He was a senior team leader in SEAL Team 6, one of the most elite special operations units in the world. And he was indeed on his way to the mall, along with several teammates who happened to be in town for a joint training exercise with local law enforcement. Exactly 12 minutes after Chen's phone call, the first indicators of an extraordinary response began to materialize. The mall's main entrance automatic doors opened to admit a group of men who, while dressed in civilian clothes, moved with the unmistakable precision and awareness of professional operators. They spread out, communicating via discreet earpieces, conducting a rapid security assessment even as they moved purposefully toward the center court. Outside, as captured by the mall's security cameras and dozens of startled shoppers' phones, 6 unmarked black SUVs with government plates executed a textbook tactical deployment around the building's main entrances. The vehicles moved in perfect synchronization, coming to precise stops that established a perimeter without blocking emergency access routes. From these vehicles emerged 16 men, moving with disciplined efficiency. Though they wore no uniforms, mostly jeans, tactical pants and casual shirts, there was no mistaking their identity. These were special operators, their bearing alone identifying them as clearly as any insignia might have. 4 remained with the vehicles, establishing an outer security cordon. The rest entered the mall through different access points, moving with purpose, but without causing panic. Leading them was a tall, distinguished man in his early 60s, whose bearing commanded immediate respect. Retired General William Kearney had once led the Joint Special Operations Command. Now he served as the director of the Veterans Crisis Response Network, a semi-official organization staffed largely by former Special Operations personnel. When a call came in concerning a legend like Edwin Hawkins, Kearney had immediately activated the network's highest response protocol. Meanwhile, inside the mall, the situation at Center Court was evolving rapidly. Paramedics had arrived and were attending to Hawk, who continued to insist he was just fine, despite evidence to the contrary. Mall management had appeared, clearly distressed by the incident and the growing social media firestorm. The original security guard, Trent Morris, was being detained by his own colleagues pending the arrival of local police. The crowd of concerned onlookers had grown, many openly recording the aftermath. The prevailing mood was one of collective outrage at the treatment of an elderly veteran, coupled with genuine concern for his well-being. No one noticed the systematic arrival of the plainclothes operators, who blended expertly with the crowd, while establishing tactical positions throughout the space. It was into this charged atmosphere that Lieutenant Commander James Hawkins arrived, having received Chen's text update about the situation. He moved directly to his grandfather's side, his training evident in his controlled urgency. "Grandpa," he said, kneeling beside the paramedics' equipment, "what happened?" The elder Hawkins looked up, his face brightening despite the circumstances. "James, good to see you, son. Just a little misunderstanding. Nothing to worry about." Before James could respond, the crowd parted to admit General Kearney and his personal security detail. The effect was immediate. Even without uniforms or announced identities, the power dynamic in the space shifted palpably. Mall security personnel straightened instinctively. The paramedics, sensing the arrival of significant authority, provided a quick medical update without being asked. "Sir," one of them addressed Hawk respectfully, having been informed of his military background by the bystanders, "you have a laceration on your elbow that needs stitches, possible bruising to your hip, and we need to check for potential concussion. We strongly recommend transport to the hospital for further evaluation." Hawk looked from the paramedic to his grandson, then to General Kearney, whom he recognized immediately, despite the years since they had last met. A slight smile crossed his face. "Bill Kearney," he said, shaking his head slightly. "Isn't this a bit excessive for an old man taking a tumble?" General Kearney approached, clasping Hawk's hand firmly but gently. "Edwin Hawkins, it's been too long. And no, this response is exactly proportionate when one of the founding fathers of American special operations is assaulted while trying to enjoy a peaceful Saturday." The atmosphere in the mall's center court shifted dramatically with General Kearney's arrival. The crowd, already sympathetic to Hawk, now watched in fascination as what appeared to be a military operation unfolded in the middle of their Saturday shopping. A retired army colonel in the crowd recognized Kearney immediately and whispered to those nearby, "That's General William Kearney, former head of Joint Special Operations Command. Something major is happening here." The security camera footage would later show the methodical, professional way Kearney's team established control of the situation. They didn't display weapons or make dramatic announcements. They simply moved into position with the quiet efficiency that characterized elite units, creating a secure perimeter while civilian shoppers continued their activities largely undisturbed beyond the center court. Lieutenant Commander James Hawkins straightened to attention when he recognized the general, though he wore civilian clothes, dark jeans, and a grey Henley that did little to disguise his military bearing. "General Kearney, sir," he said, surprise is evident in his voice. Kearney nodded acknowledgement. "At ease, Commander. I see you beat us here." "Just barely, sir. I was already en route to meet my grandfather." James looked down at Hawk, who was now sitting upright on a bench while the paramedics continued their assessment. "What's the operational status?" The question wasn't just military formality. Both men understood that the operation now unfolding had multiple dimensions: medical care for Hawk, securing the scene, managing the public relations aspect, and ensuring appropriate consequences for those responsible. "Site secure, additional assets inbound," Kearney replied succinctly. "Your teammates are establishing an outer perimeter. Local law enforcement has been briefed and is cooperating fully. The Veterans Affairs Secretary is personally monitoring the situation." Hawk shook his head slightly, his weathered features showing a mixture of appreciation and embarrassment at the scale of the response. "All this fuss over an old man and an overzealous security guard. In my day, we'd have settled this with a handshake or a quick scuffle behind the mess tent." A retired Navy corpsman who had been helping attend to Hawk before the paramedics arrived chuckled. "Different times, Master Sergeant. These days, we take care of our own more publicly." General Kearney's attention shifted to the mall security personnel. The original security guard, Trent Morris, was sitting on a nearby bench, pale and visibly shaken, flanked by two of his colleagues who were effectively preventing him from leaving. The mall's security director, a former police officer named Raymond Jenkins, was approaching cautiously, clearly recognizing that he was walking into a situation far beyond the usual scope of mall incidents. "General Kearney," Jenkins said, extending his hand tentatively. "I'm Ray Jenkins, head of security for Westfield Plaza. I want to personally express my deepest apologies for this unconscionable incident. I assure you, this is not how we train our personnel to interact with any patron, much less a distinguished veteran." Kearney's handshake was brief, but not openly hostile. "Mr. Jenkins, I understand this situation is not representative of your security protocols. However, we will need a full accounting of today's events, including all security footage, personnel, records for the individual involved, and your complete policies regarding interaction with elderly patrons and veterans." Jenkins nodded quickly. "Of course, sir. We're already gathering that information. The guard in question was hired only 3 months ago. He was still on probationary status." "Was," Kearney noted the past tense. "Yes, sir. His employment has been terminated, effective immediately. We're also fully cooperating with police regarding potential charges." A police sergeant who had just arrived stepped forward, having caught the last part of the conversation. "Sergeant Ramirez, County PD. We're treating this as a potential assault case. We'll need statements from Master Sergeant Hawkins and all witnesses." Kearney nodded. "You'll have full cooperation, Sergeant. My team has already begun collecting contact information from witnesses. I'd suggest you start with the young woman who captured video of the entire incident." He gestured toward the teenager who was still clutching her smartphone, looking both nervous and proud of her citizen. Journalism. As the police began taking statements, Hawk finally agreed to be transported to the hospital for evaluation, though only after significant persuasion from both his grandson and the paramedics. As they prepared to move him to the ambulance, Hawk fixed his gaze on Trent Morris, the security guard who had pushed him. "Son," Hawk called out, his voice stronger than might be expected given his age and condition, "come over here a moment." The sudden request created an awkward pause. The security personnel looked to Jenkins, who looked to the police sergeant, who glanced at General Kearney. Kearney studied Hawk's face, then nodded slightly. "Let him approach," Kearney directed. Supervised. Trent Morris was escorted to stand before Hawk, flanked by a police officer and one of Kearney's plainclothes operators. The young security guard's face was a mask of misery and fear. His earlier arrogance completely evaporated in the face of the serious consequences now looming before him. "Sir," Morris began, his voice barely above a whisper, "I'm so sorry. I don't know what—" Hawk raised a hand, stopping the fumbling apology. "I'm not interested in hearing you're sorry, son. Not yet. You're not sorry for what you did. You're sorry for the trouble you're in. There's a world of difference." The directness of the statement caused Morris to flinch, but Hawk continued, his tone neither condemning nor forgiving, but instructive. "I want to tell you something. Back in Vietnam, I served with men from every background imaginable. Some joined up for patriotism, others because a judge gave them a choice between the military or jail. What united us wasn't where we came from, but how we treated each other when the chips were down." Hawk's blue eyes held Morris's gaze with surprising intensity. "The measure of a man isn't found in the authority he wields, but in how he treats those who can't fight back. Today, you failed that measure spectacularly." Morris's eyes dropped to the floor, unable to maintain contact with the steady gaze of the elderly veteran. "Look at me, son," Hawk commanded, and Morris's head snapped up automatically in response to the tone. "I didn't ask you here to shame you, though you should feel ashamed. I asked you here because I want you to understand something important." Hawk gestured to the gathered special operators, the police, the concerned citizens, his grandson, and General Kearney. "All these people didn't show up because I'm special. They showed up because of what I represent, a generation of Americans who answered when their country called, regardless of the personal cost. When you disrespected me, you disrespected all of us. That's why this response seems overwhelming to you." The mall had grown quieter, many people listening intently to Hawk's words. Even the operators, professionals though they were, seemed to be paying close attention while maintaining their security posture. "I don't know what's going to happen to you legally," Hawk continued. "That's for others to decide. But I do know that you're standing at a crossroads right now. What you do next, how you respond to this failure, will define you far more than the mistake itself." Hawk reached into his pocket and pulled out the small velvet pouch containing his medals. He extracted a tarnished coin and held it up. "This is a challenge coin from my old unit. I've carried it since 1969. It reminds me of men better than myself, who never came home. I want you to take it." Morris looked stunned. "Sir, I couldn't possibly—" "You misunderstand," Hawk interrupted. "This isn't a gift. It's a responsibility. I want you to carry this coin every day as a reminder of what happened here. And when you've truly understood why what you did was wrong, not just because of the consequences, I want you to find a way to make amends, not to me, to the veteran community." With shaking hands, Morris accepted the coin. "How will I know when I've understood, sir?" Hawk's expression softened slightly. "You'll know. And when that day comes, perhaps you'll Find your own way to pass that understanding on to someone else who needs it. The paramedics indicated they needed to transport Hawk now. As they began to move the gurney, Hawk had one final comment for Morris. Everyone fails sometimes, son. The question is whether you'll let this failure define you or refine you. That choice is still yours. The impact of this unexpected moment of wisdom from the very man he had injured seemed to hit Morris with physical force. Tears welled in his eyes as he clutched the challenge coin, nodding wordlessly. As Hawk was wheeled toward the exit, the crowd spontaneously parted to create a clear path. Something even more remarkable happened. People began to applaud. It started with a few veterans who recognized the exceptional character it took for Hawk to address his assailant with such wisdom and restraint. The applause spread until most of the gathered crowd was participating in this impromptu show of respect. Lieutenant Commander James Hawkins walked alongside the gurney, pride evident in his expression as he witnessed the impact his grandfather had on everyone present. General Kearney fell into step on the other side, leaning down to speak privately. To Hawk, "That was quite a speech, old friend. Still teaching the young ones, I see." Hawk smiled slightly. "Old habits, Bill, though I'm not sure if I got through to him." "You did more than you know," Kearney replied. "That moment will reverberate far beyond this mall. We've got over a dozen videos already uploading to social media. Your words will reach a lot of people who need to hear them." As the procession neared the mall exit, the full extent of the response became visible to Hawk for the first time. Through the glass doors, he could see the tactical vehicles, the positioned operators, and a growing media presence being kept at a respectful distance by both mall security and Kearney's team. "Bill," Hawk said, his voice tinged with equal parts. Amusement and exasperation. "Don't you think this is excessive?" "I took a tumble, not a bullet." Kearney's expression remained serious. "This isn't just about you, Edwin. It's about sending a message. The way we treat our veterans, especially our elderly veterans, reflects our values as a nation. Sometimes that message needs to be delivered with appropriate emphasis." James Hawkins nodded in agreement. "The General's right, Grandpa. This response isn't just for you. It's for every veteran who's been disrespected or forgotten. Sometimes you need a show of force to remind people of what matters." As they exited the building, several of the special operators snapped to attention, rendering sharp salutes to Hawk as he passed. These weren't ceremonial gestures, but genuine expressions of respect from one generation of warriors to another. The media, kept at bay by Kearney's perimeter team, shouted questions. "Sir, can you tell us what happened inside?" Master Sergeant Hawkins, how are you feeling?" "General Kearney, why has JSOC responded to a mall incident?" Kearney ignored them all, focusing instead on ensuring Hawk's dignified transfer to the waiting ambulance. Once Hawk was secured inside, with James accompanying him, Kearney turned to address the gathered press with a brief, prepared statement. "Today, an American hero was disrespected and physically assaulted while simply trying to rest during a shopping trip. Master Sergeant Edwin Hawkins served 3 tours in Vietnam with distinction as part of highly classified special operations units. His service record includes the Silver Star, 3 Purple Hearts, and numerous other decorations that we cannot fully disclose even now." Kearney's voice carried the natural authority of someone accustomed to command. The Veterans Crisis Response Network was alerted to this situation and deployed assets that were fortunately in the vicinity due to a training exercise. We are cooperating fully with local law enforcement, who will determine appropriate charges against the individual responsible. A reporter called out, "General, isn't this response disproportionate for what was essentially a minor assault?" Kearney's expression hardened slightly. "There is nothing minor about assaulting an 88-year-old. veteran who sacrificed more for this country than most of us could comprehend. The network's response was precisely proportionate to ensure Master Sergeant Hawkins received immediate medical attention, proper respect, and that this incident receives the public attention it deserves. Another journalist pressed, "But sir, deploying what appears to be special operations personnel to a shopping mall. These are veterans volunteering their time with a legitimate crisis response organization," Kearney interrupted firmly. "No active duty special operations units were deployed. No federal regulations were circumvented. These men and women simply responded to a fellow veteran in need, exactly as they were trained to do throughout their military careers." As Kearney continued fielding questions, the ambulance departed with lights flashing but no siren, carrying Hawk and James to the nearby Veterans Hospital rather than the civilian emergency room. Inside the ambulance, Hawk finally allowed himself to acknowledge the pain he was feeling, not just the physical discomfort from the fall, but the deeper hurt of being treated with such disrespect in the country he had sacrificed so much to serve. James noticed his grandfather's shift in mood. "You okay, Grandpa? Do you need the paramedics to give you something for pain?" Hawk shook his head slightly. "Not that kind of pain, son." He looked out the small rear window at the receding view of the mall and the assembled response team. "I just keep wondering, when we became a country where an old veteran gets shoved to the ground for taking a moment's rest, and it takes a military-style operation to remind people of basic respect." James considered this thoughtfully. "I think that's why what General Kearney is doing is so important. The Veterans Crisis Response Network isn't just about helping veterans in trouble. It's about making these incidents visible, making them matter in the public consciousness." "Perhaps," Hawk acknowledged, "still seems like a lot of fuss over one old soldier." "It's never about just one soldier, Grandpa. You taught me that." James smiled at the older man who had inspired his own military career. "Remember what you told me when I was deciding whether to try out for the SEALs. You said, 'The actions of one operator can echo through history, but it's the team that makes the impossible possible.'" Hawk chuckled softly. "Using my own words against me. Well played." The paramedic monitoring Hawk's vitals smiled at the exchange. "Sir, if you don't mind my saying, what you did back there with that security guard was one of the most impressive things I've ever witnessed. Most people would have been calling for his head." "Vengeance is easy," Hawk replied. "Understanding is harder, but infinitely more valuable. That young man doesn't need punishment as much as he needs perspective. Maybe carrying that challenge coin will give him some." As the ambulance pulled into the Veterans Hospital entrance, they were met by an honor guard that had assembled spontaneously. Hospital staff, patients able to stand, and veterans who had heard about the incident through the rapidly spreading news and social media coverage. Again, Hawk found himself at the center of respectful attention he neither expected nor felt he deserved. Dr. Eleanor Reeves, the hospital's chief of geriatric medicine and herself a retired Army physician, waited by the ambulance doors. "Master Sergeant Hawkins," she greeted him with professional warmth as the paramedics transferred his gurney. "I served with your son Robert in Desert Storm. It's an honor to have you in our care." The mention of his late son, who had followed him into the Army and died in a training accident 10 years earlier, touched Hawk deeply. "Thank you, Doctor. Robert always spoke highly of the medical personnel who kept you all patched up over there." As they moved through the hospital corridors, Dr. Reeves briefed him on the evaluation they would conduct. "We'll do a full workup, X-rays to check for fractures, especially around your prosthetic attachment points, neurological assessment for any concussion symptoms, and we'll have our prosthetics team examine your leg for any damage." Hawk accepted this with a nod. "Whatever you think is necessary, Doctor, though I still maintain this level of attention is absolutely warranted." Dr. Reeves finished firmly. Master Sergeant, you may see yourself as just one veteran who took a fall, but to many of us you represent something much larger. The care and respect we show you reflects how we value all who served. As they reached the examination room, James received a text message that drew his attention. "Grandpa, I need to step out for a moment. General Kearney is requesting an update." "Go ahead, son," Hawk replied. "I'm in good hands here." Once James had left, Dr. Reeves helped Hawk transfer to the examination table. As she began her initial assessment, she spoke in a more personal tone. "Off the record, Master Sergeant, what happened at that mall is happening too often across the country. Veterans, especially elderly veterans, being treated as invisible or inconvenient. General Kearney's network has documented over 300 significant incidents just this year." Hawk frowned. "That many? I had no idea." "Most never make the news," Dr. Reeves confirmed. "But what's different about your case is that it's going to be impossible to ignore. The General has made sure of that. Sometimes it takes a dramatic response to shine light on a systemic problem." This perspective gave Hawk pause. Perhaps the scale of the response wasn't as disproportionate as he had initially thought, if it served a greater purpose than just his individual situation. Meanwhile, in a conference room down the hall, Lieutenant Commander James Hawkins was on a secure video call with General Kearney and several other key figures in the Veterans Crisis Response Network. The screen showed not only Kearney at the mall, but also participants from Washington, D.C., including a deputy secretary from the Department of Veterans Affairs and the chairman of a prominent veterans advocacy organization. "The media coverage is building exponentially," reported the network's public affairs officer. "All major networks have picked up the story. Social media engagement is through the roof, particularly the video of Master Sergeant Hawkins addressing the security guard. That clip has already been viewed over 2 million times and is trending nationally." James listened intently as the implications of his grandfather's incident expanded far beyond what anyone might have anticipated. What had begun as a simple case of disrespect and assault was rapidly transforming into a national conversation about how America treats its aging veterans. "Commander Hawkins," the deputy secretary addressed him, "how is your grandfather doing? Will he be comfortable with this level of public attention?" James considered the question carefully. "My grandfather is a private man by nature, sir. He's never sought recognition for his service. That said, if he believes this incident can help other veterans receive better treatment and respect, he'll support the effort. He's always put the welfare of his fellow service members above his own comfort." General Kearney nodded in agreement. "That's consistent with the Edwin Hawkins I've known for 40 years. He'll be uncomfortable with the attention, but committed to the cause." The meeting continued, with strategies discussed for leveraging this incident to drive meaningful policy changes at national retail chains, public venues, and government facilities regarding treatment of elderly veterans. James found himself impressed by how quickly and efficiently the network had mobilized not just an immediate response, but a comprehensive campaign to ensure lasting impact. When the meeting concluded, James returned to find his grandfather already finishing his medical evaluation. Dr. Reeves provided a reassuring update. No fractures or serious injuries. Some significant bruising to his hip and elbow, minor laceration that we've sutured, and we've adjusted his prosthetic fitting where it was damaged in the fall. I'd like to keep him overnight for observation, primarily as a precaution given his age." Hawk looked less than thrilled at this recommendation, but didn't argue. "Whatever you think best, Doctor, though I still have my wits about me." "That's evident, Master Sergeant," Dr. Reeves replied with a smile. "Your neurological function is excellent. Your pain threshold, however, is suspiciously high, a common trait among special operations veterans who've been hiding their discomfort. This observation drew a reluctant chuckle from Hawk. Guilty as charged, I suppose. As evening fell, Edwin Hawkins found himself in a private room at the Veterans Affairs Medical Center, surrounded by more attention and comfort than he had experienced in years. The hospital staff had placed him in their VIP suite, normally reserved for visiting dignitaries and high-ranking military officials. The room featured large windows overlooking the city lights, comfortable furnishings for visitors, and walls adorned with military memorabilia and artwork depicting scenes from various American conflicts. Hawk sat propped up in bed, his weathered face illuminated by the soft glow of the bedside lamp. The bruising along his arm had darkened, and the doctors had confirmed 3 cracked ribs, injuries he had dismissed as just a bit of soreness. Earlier, his prosthetic leg had been temporarily replaced with a newer model, while the hospital's prosthetics department made adjustments to his regular one, which had sustained damage in the fall. James had stepped out momentarily to get coffee, leaving Hawk alone with his thoughts. The television mounted on the wall was muted, but tuned to a national news network where footage from the mall incident played on a loop. Hawk could see himself on the screen, being helped by bystanders, then the arrival of General Kearney's team, and finally his own words to the security guard. The surreal experience of watching himself become a national news story left him feeling conflicted. A soft knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," Hawk called, expecting a nurse for the hourly vitals check. Instead, a slender woman in her late 60s entered, her silver hair cut in a practical bob, wearing a simple blue dress with a Veterans Affairs identification badge. Something about her seemed vaguely familiar to Hawk. "Master Sergeant Hawkins," she said, her voice carrying the slight lilt of a southern accent. "I'm Margaret Sullivan, VA patient advocate. I hope I'm not disturbing you." "Not at all," Hawk replied, gesturing to the visitor's chair, "though I'm afraid you've made a special trip for nothing. I have no complaints about my care here. It's been exemplary." Margaret smiled as she took the offered seat. "I'm not here about your current care, Master Sergeant. I'm here about something that happened almost 50 years ago." Hawk's brow furrowed slightly. "I'm afraid you have me at a disadvantage, ma'am. You wouldn't remember me," Margaret continued. "I was just a young nurse at Walter Reed in 1970 when they brought you in after your 3rd tour. You'd lost your leg and were fighting a serious infection. The doctors weren't sure you'd make it." Recognition dawned slowly in Hawk's eyes. "You were the night shift nurse, the one who kept talking to me even when I was delirious with fever." Margaret's eyes widened in surprise. "You do remember." "Only fragments," Hawk admitted, "but I remember a voice that wouldn't let me drift away. That kept telling me stories about Tennessee and making me promise to see the Smoky Mountains in spring once I recovered." "That was me," Margaret confirmed, visibly moved that he recalled anything at all. "I was fresh out of nursing school, assigned to the ward with the most critical patients. You were under my care for nearly 3 weeks." "Did I ever thank you properly?" Hawk asked quietly. Margaret shook her head. "You didn't need to. You did something far more important. You survived." She paused, composing herself. "But that's not why I'm here tonight. I'm here because of what happened after you recovered." Hawk waited silently as Margaret gathered her thoughts. "After you were discharged from Walter Reed, you came back. Not as a patient, but as a visitor. Every Tuesday for a year, you'd arrive with books and magazines. You'd spend hours with the new amputees, especially the young ones who couldn't see a future beyond their injuries. You showed them it was possible to adapt, to continue serving in your case, to find purpose again." Hawk nodded slowly, the memories returning. "They needed to see someone who had walked the same path. Words of encouragement mean more coming from someone who understands the journey. Do you know how many lives you touched during that year? Margaret asked. I kept track. 73 soldiers, sailors and Marines benefited directly from your visits. But that's not where it ended. Many of them went on to do the same for others. A few started formal peer counseling programs that exist to this day. She reached into a small portfolio she carried and removed a folder. What you may not know is that the VA has been conducting a longitudinal study on peer support programs for the past 4 decades. Your informal visits helped establish the model for what has become one of our most successful interventions for wounded warriors. Hawk accepted the folder with surprise. Inside were photographs, letters, and formal reports documenting the evolution of veteran peer support programs, many tracing their inspiration back to the informal efforts he and others had pioneered. I had no idea, he said softly, turning the pages with care. I was just trying to help the next man cope with what I'd already faced. That's exactly why it worked, Margaret explained. No agenda, no bureaucracy, just one veteran helping another. We've formalized aspects of it over the years, but the core principle remains the same: authentic connection based on shared experience. She leaned forward slightly. Master Sergeant, the reason I'm here tonight is that I saw you on the news, and I recognized immediately what you were doing with that young security guard. Even after being injured by him, you were still teaching, still trying to guide someone who needed direction. After all these years, you haven't changed. Hawk looked up from the folder, meeting her gaze. Some lessons stay with you, I suppose. The VA would like to document your story properly this time, Margaret continued. With your permission, we'd like to record a series of interviews about your experiences both in Vietnam and in your work with other veterans. These would become part of our training materials for new healthcare providers working with combat veterans. Before Hawk could respond, the door opened again as James returned. With 2 coffee cups, he paused when he saw the visitor. I'm sorry, I didn't realize my grandfather had company, he said. Not at all, Commander, Margaret replied, recognizing his rank though he was in civilian clothes. I was just discussing a project with your grandfather. I'll leave you two to your coffee. As she stood to leave, Hawk reached out to touch her. Margaret, the Smoky Mountains in spring. Did I ever make good on that promise to see them? She smiled warmly. No, Master Sergeant, but they're still there, waiting for whenever you're ready. After Margaret departed, James handed his grandfather a cup of coffee and settled into the chair she had vacated. What was that about? Hawk took a sip before answering. A reminder that we never really know the full impact of our actions. He gestured to the folder. Apparently, some informal visits I made to wounded veterans back in the 70s helped spark programs that still exist today. James nodded thoughtfully. That doesn't surprise me. You've always had a gift for connecting with people in their darkest moments. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, each lost in their own thoughts as the muted television continued to show footage from the day's events. The ticker at the bottom of the screen indicated that the story had gone national, with hashtags related to veteran respect trending across social media platforms. You've become quite the celebrity, Grandpa, James observed with a hint of amusement. Hawk scoffed lightly. Hardly the legacy I envisioned. Elderly veteran gets pushed. News at 11. It's become much more than that, James replied, his tone turning serious. General Kearney called while I was getting coffee. The network has been flooded with similar stories from veterans across the country. Incidents of disrespect, dismissal, even outright hostility. Your experience has opened a floodgate. Hawk's expression sobered. So, I'm not just an isolated case of one overzealous security guard. Far from it. The general believes this could be the catalyst for meaningful change in how businesses, public spaces, and institutions interact with elderly veterans. They're already drafting guidelines for major retail chains and shopping centers. The conversation was interrupted by another knock at the door. This time, it was Dr. Reeves, accompanied by an older man in a well-tailored suit, whom Hawke immediately recognized as Senator Howard Mitchell, a decorated Vietnam veteran himself and the chairman of the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee. "Master Sergeant Hawkins," the senator greeted him warmly, approaching the bed with hand extended. "I apologize for the late visit, but I was in town for a conference when I heard about what happened. I wanted to check on you personally." Hawke shook the offered hand with a firm grip. "Senator Mitchell, this is unexpected. I appreciate the concern, but I assure you I'm receiving excellent care." "I have no doubt," the senator replied, nodding respectfully to Dr. Reeves. "The VA medical system has improved dramatically in recent years, thanks in part to the advocacy of veterans like yourself, who weren't afraid to speak up about its shortcomings." The senator declined the offered chair, preferring to stand. "I'm not here just as a courtesy call, Master Sergeant. I'm here because what happened to you today has highlighted a persistent issue that my committee has been trying to address for years. The disconnection between how we claim to honor our veterans and how they're actually treated in daily life." "With all due respect, Senator," Hawke responded, "surely there are more pressing matters for your attention than one old soldier taking a tumble." Senator Mitchell's expression grew solemn. "That tumble, as you call it, Master Sergeant, is precisely the kind of incident that reveals the gap between our national rhetoric about veterans and the reality many face. It's also exactly the kind of story that can move public opinion and create momentum for change." He glanced at the muted television, where the coverage continued. "Your response to that young security guard has resonated deeply with people across the political spectrum. In these divided times, that's no small achievement." Dr. Reeves, who had been quietly monitoring Hawke's vital signs during this exchange, interjected gently, "Senator, while I appreciate the importance of this conversation, I should remind everyone that Master Sergeant Hawkins has experienced physical trauma today and needs his rest." Senator Mitchell nodded immediately. "Of course, Doctor, I'll be brief." He turned back to Hawke. "My committee is holding hearings next month on the treatment of elderly veterans in public spaces and commercial establishments. We would be honored if you would consider testifying." The request caught Hawke by surprise. "Testify before Congress? Senator, I'm not sure what value my personal experience would add to your deliberations." "Immeasurable value," the senator assured him. "Policy discussions and statistics only go so far. A first-hand account from someone of your stature would humanize the issue in ways no amount of data ever could." Before Hawke could respond, the senator continued, "You wouldn't be alone. We're inviting several veterans who've experienced similar incidents, as well as representatives from business associations, law enforcement, and veterans advocacy groups. Your voice would be part of a larger chorus calling for change." James, who had been listening intently, spoke up. "Grandpa, this could be important, not just for you, but for veterans everywhere who face these kinds of situations without having a general and special operators showing up to back them up." Hawke considered this thoughtfully. He had never sought the spotlight, had never viewed his service as anything more than doing what needed to be done when his country called. But perhaps this was another form of service, using his unexpected visibility to help others who shared his experiences, but lacked his sudden platform. "I'll consider it, Senator," he finally replied, "on one condition." "Name it," Senator Mitchell responded immediately. "That security guard, Trent Morris. I want assurances that any legislation or policies that emerge from these hearings focus On education and awareness, not just punishment. That young man didn't wake up planning to assault a veteran. He's a product of a system that failed to instill proper values and understanding. The senator studied Hawk with newfound appreciation. Your compassion is remarkable, Master Sergeant, especially given the circumstances. I can certainly commit to ensuring that education and awareness are central to our approach. After the senator departed with promises to be in touch once Hawk had recovered, Dr. Reeves completed her examination. You're doing well, all things considered, but I'm detecting signs of fatigue. I'm going to have to insist on no more visitors tonight. Appreciated, Doctor, Hawk replied, feeling the truth of her assessment in the deep weariness settling into his bones. Even his prosthetic's attachment point ached more than usual, a reminder of the physical trauma his body had endured. James stood, gathering his jacket. I'll head home and come back in the morning, Grandpa. Is there anything you need? Just some peace and quiet, Hawk answered with a tired smile. And maybe for the news to find something more interesting to talk about than an old soldier taking a spill. After James left, Hawk finally had a moment alone with his thoughts. He picked up the remote and unmuted the television, curious despite himself about how the media was portraying the day's events. The anchor's voice filled the room. What many are calling a powerful moment of grace and wisdom. In case you're just joining us, we're continuing our coverage of the incident at Westfield Plaza Mall, where 88-year-old Vietnam veteran Edwin Hawkins was assaulted by a security guard. The response from military special operations veterans has drawn national attention, but it's Master Sergeant Hawkins' words to his assailant that have truly captured the public imagination. The screen showed footage of Hawk speaking to Trent Morris, the challenge coin glinting in the mall's lighting as he handed it to the young security guard. The audio was surprisingly clear. Everyone fails sometimes, son. The question is whether you'll let this failure define you or refine you. That choice is still yours. The segment cut to a panel discussion where a retired Marine general was speaking. What we witnessed today wasn't just an elderly veteran being mistreated. We witnessed the gulf between those who understand service and sacrifice and those who've never been taught to recognize it. Master Sergeant Hawkins' response demonstrates the character that makes our veterans such a valuable national resource, even decades after their active service ends. Hawk muted the television again, uncomfortable with the praise and analysis of what he viewed as a simple human interaction. He gazed out the window at the city lights, remembering other nights in hospital beds, in field hospitals with the sounds of combat still echoing in the distance, at Walter Reed, where Margaret Sullivan had helped guide him back from the brink, in various VA facilities over the years, as age and old injuries demanded their toll. His thoughts drifted to the young men he had served with in Vietnam, particularly those in the classified May CV SOG operations. So many had never come home. Others had returned forever changed, struggling to find their place in a country that often seemed indifferent to their sacrifices. Hawk had been more fortunate than most. He had found purpose in helping others navigate the challenges he had already faced, had built a family and a life beyond his military service. The security guard's face floated into his mind. Young, frightened, suddenly confronted with the consequences of actions taken in a moment of poor judgment. Hawk wondered if the challenge coin was still in the young man's pocket, whether its weight carried any meaning yet beyond a reminder of a terrible mistake. A soft knock at the door roused him from his reflections. Despite Dr. Reeves's instructions about no more visitors, the door opened to admit a nurse bringing his evening medications. Just these to take before you settle in for the night, Master. Sergeant, she said, placing a small paper cup containing 2 pills on his bedside table alongside a glass of water. Thank you, Hawk replied, reaching for the cup. The nurse hesitated before turning to leave. Sir, I hope you don't mind my saying, but my father was also in Vietnam, 25th Infantry Division. He doesn't talk about it much, but he has that same look you get sometimes, like you're seeing things the rest of us can't. Hawk regarded her thoughtfully. Some memories leave deeper impressions than others. Dad struggles with being thanked for his service, she continued. Says he was just doing his job, that the real heroes never came home. Your father sounds like a wise man, Hawk observed. Many of us feel that way. I showed him the video of you talking to that security guard, the nurse admitted. He watched it 3 times, then went very quiet. Later, I found him on the phone with some of his old buddies from his unit. They're planning their first reunion in decades. He said you reminded him of something important he'd forgotten. Hawkeye felt a tightness in his chest that had nothing to do with his cracked ribs. What was that? That carrying the memory of the fallen means living in a way that honors them, she replied. Dad said, watching you handle that situation with dignity instead of anger showed him there's still ways to serve, even now. After the nurse departed, Hawk swallowed his medication and settled back against the pillows. The day's events replayed. In his mind, not just the fall and the pain, but the extraordinary response it had triggered and the connections that had emerged in its wake. Margaret Sullivan from all those years ago at Walter Reed, Senator Mitchell seeing an opportunity for meaningful policy change. And now this nurse, sharing how his actions had somehow touched her father and sparked renewal among veterans who had perhaps been drifting apart. The realization settled over him slowly, that even this difficult experience might serve a purpose beyond himself. That the values he had tried to live by throughout his long life could still resonate and inspire others. That perhaps his most important service wasn't the classified missions in distant jungles or the medals in his display case, but the example he set each day in how he faced challenges and treated others. As sleep began to claim him, Hawk found himself thinking not of the mall or the security guard or the sudden national attention, but of those young men in Vietnam, his brothers in arms, who had given their tomorrows so that he and others could have decades of life to shape and share. In his mind, he made them a silent promise to use whatever platform this incident had given him to ensure that their sacrifices and those of all veterans would be remembered and honored, not just in words and monuments, but in how Americans treated each other every day. The following morning brought a stream of visitors to Hawk's hospital room, beginning with James, who arrived early with fresh clothes and Hawk's preferred brand of aftershave. As James helped his grandfather with his morning routine, they discussed the growing media coverage and public response to the incident. The network had to set up a special email address just to handle all the messages coming in for you, James explained as he helped Hawk adjust his new temporary prosthetic. Veterans from across the country are sharing similar stories. Some news outlets are calling it a national conversation about respect for veterans. Hawk frowned slightly as he tested the fit of the prosthetic. Seems like a conversation we shouldn't need to have in the first place. Maybe, James acknowledged, but we do need it. And sometimes it takes a catalyst, something that cuts through the noise and makes people pay attention. Before Hawk could respond, Dr. Reeves arrived for morning rounds, accompanied by a prosthetic specialist who wanted to discuss options for an upgraded permanent prosthetic. The VE was offering Hawk access to their latest technology, a computer-assisted model that would provide greater comfort and mobility than his current decades-old design. This new system adapts to your gait and terrain in real time, the specialist explained enthusiastically. Many of our younger veterans from Iraq and Afghanistan are using this model with excellent results. Hawk listened attentively, but with some skepticism. I've been using the same basic design since 1972. Not sure this old dog needs new tricks. Dr. Reeves smiled understandingly. Consider it, Master Sergeant. Improved mobility might help prevent future falls. We want you walking confidently for many years to come, especially if you're going to be testifying before Congress. Word of Senator Mitchell's invitation had clearly spread through the hospital. Hawk realized that his decision about whether to testify now carried implications beyond his personal preference for privacy. People were investing hope in his willingness to speak up. As the medical team completed their evaluation, a hospital administrator appeared at the door. "Master Sergeant Hawkins, you have some visitors in the lobby. Quite a few, actually. Hospital policy normally limits visitors to family, but given the circumstances..." She trailed off, clearly hoping for guidance. "What kind of visitors?" Hawk asked, puzzled. "Veterans, sir, from the local VFW and American Legion posts. Word spread about what happened, and they've come to show support. There's also a group of active duty service members from the nearby base." Hawk looked to James, then Dr. Reeves. "I don't want to disappoint them, but I'm not sure I'm up for a large gathering." Dr. Reeves considered this. A brief visit might be appropriate, but in a controlled setting. Perhaps the hospital auditorium, rather than having everyone crowd into this room and limited to 30 minutes, given your condition. The compromise seemed reasonable. With James's help, Hawk dressed in proper clothes rather than a hospital gown, insisting on appearing dignified despite his injuries. He used a wheelchair, a concession to Dr. Reeves' concerns about his stability with the new temporary prosthetic, but sat tall as James wheeled him toward the auditorium. What awaited Hawk in the hospital's small auditorium left him momentarily speechless. At least 50 veterans spanning multiple generations stood as he entered, from elderly men who had clearly served in Korea or even World War II to young active duty personnel in their service uniforms. They formed an impromptu honor corridor, coming to attention as James wheeled his grandfather between their ranks. At the front of the room stood General Kearney, alongside 3 other retired generals and admirals who had responded to his call and flown in overnight. The local VFW commander stepped forward as Hawk reached the front. "Master Sergeant Hawkins," he began, his voice carrying the formal tone of an official presentation, "on behalf of veterans across this nation, we want to thank you not just for your distinguished service decades ago, but for your dignity and wisdom yesterday. You showed America what it means to be a warrior, even when the battlefield is a shopping mall and the weapon is moral courage." The commander presented Hawk with a shadow box containing a new VFW medal, created specifically to honor veterans who had shown exceptional character in civilian life. "This is the first of its kind, Master Sergeant. The National Commander approved it by emergency vote last night. It will henceforth be known as the Hawkins Medal for Dignity Under Fire." Hawk stared at the shadow box in his weathered hands, momentarily at a loss for words. The medal gleamed under the auditorium lights, a simple yet elegant design featuring a shield backed by crossed rifles with the words "Dignity Under Fire" inscribed beneath. The weight of the moment settled on his shoulders, not as a burden, but as a responsibility he hadn't sought, yet couldn't deny. "I'm honored," he finally said, his voice steady despite the emotion welling in his chest. "But this recognition belongs to all of us who've worn the uniform. I was just in the right place at the wrong time." A ripple of appreciative chuckles moved through the assembled veterans, that quintessential military humor, finding the lighter side in difficult situations, bridged generations and branches of service in an instant. One of the younger veterans, a woman wearing a Marine Corps cap with Iraq service pins, spoke up. "Master Sergeant, would you mind sharing some thoughts with us? Your experience yesterday has sparked conversations in veterans groups across the country." Hawk nodded slowly, glancing at James, who gave him an encouraging smile. The wheelchair, positioned him naturally at the front of the room, and the crowd quieted in anticipation. "I've never been one for speeches," Hawk began, "but I've been reflecting on what happened yesterday and what it might mean beyond one old soldier and one misguided young man." He placed the shadow box carefully on his lap, his gnarled fingers resting atop it. "In Vietnam, my unit operated deep behind enemy lines. We lived by a simple code: leave no one behind. It didn't matter if a mission had gone sideways or if retrieving a wounded man meant additional risk. We did whatever it took to bring everyone home." The veterans nodded in silent understanding. This principle transcended eras and conflicts, a foundational value of American military service. "Yesterday at that mall, I realized something important," Hawk continued. "As a nation, we're leaving too many veterans behind. Not on foreign battlefields, but right here at home, in our public spaces, our institutions, our everyday interactions. We're allowing them to become invisible or, worse, inconvenient." His gaze swept across the faces before him, young and old, men and women, representing diverse backgrounds, but unified by service. "What happened to me isn't unusual. What's unusual is that someone recorded it, and that a general happened to have a rapid response team nearby." The truth of this statement registered in the solemn expressions around the room. Many had experienced similar disrespect without cameras rolling or influential advocates rushing to their aid. "But here's what gives me hope," Hawk said, his voice strengthening. "When that security guard pushed me, at least a dozen ordinary citizens immediately stepped up. The young woman who recorded it, the nurse who helped me, the businessman who made the call that brought General Kearney's team. None of them wore uniforms anymore, but they hadn't forgotten what it means to leave no one behind." He gestured to the diverse group before him. "That's the America I fought for, one where we look out for each other, where respect isn't just a word but an action, where the promises we make to those who serve aren't forgotten once the uniform comes off." A murmur of agreement rippled through the audience. "I've been asked to testify before Congress about what happened," Hawk revealed. "At first, I was reluctant. I've never sought the spotlight. But if my experience can help ensure other veterans receive the respect and consideration they've earned, then perhaps this old soldier has one more mission to complete." The spontaneous standing ovation that followed brought tears to the eyes of even the most stoic veterans present. General Kearney approached Hawk and leaned down to speak privately. "That's why it had to be you, Edwin," he said. "You've always understood that our greatest service sometimes comes long after we've hung up the uniform." As the impromptu gathering concluded, Dr. Reeves signaled that Hawk needed to return to his room to rest. The assembled veterans formed another honor corridor as James wheeled his grandfather out, each offering a respectful salute or handshake as he passed. In the hallway, they encountered an unexpected visitor. Trent Morris, the security guard from the mall, standing nervously with a small gift bag in his hands. He wore civilian clothes, his demeanor drastically different from the arrogant authority figure of the previous day. James tensed protectively, but Hawk placed a restraining hand on his grandson's arm. "It's all right, James." Trent stepped forward tentatively. "Master Sergeant Hawkins, I wasn't sure if they'd let me see you. I understand if you don't want to talk to me. That would rather defeat the purpose of giving you that challenge coin, wouldn't it?" Hawk replied evenly. "If you've come in good faith, I'm willing to listen." Trent swallowed hard. "I spent all night thinking about what you said, about choices and whether this failure defines or refines me." He hesitated, clearly struggling with his emotions. "I've never felt more ashamed of anything in my life, not just because of the trouble I'm in, but because when I watched that video, when I saw myself through other people's eyes, I didn't recognize the person I've become." The young man's raw honesty was palpable. Hawk studied him thoughtfully, seeing not just regret, but the first glimmers of self-awareness. Recognition is the first step toward change. What's the next step you're planning to take? I want to make amends, sir. Not just to you, but like you said, to the veteran community. Trent held out the small gift bag. This isn't much, but it's a start. Inside was a framed certificate showing that Trent had made a donation to the Wounded Warrior Project in Hawk's name, along with a handwritten letter. I used my last paycheck from the mall, Trent explained, and I've signed up to volunteer. At the VA hospital, once my legal situation is resolved. I know it doesn't fix what I did, but it's a beginning, Hawk acknowledged, nodding slightly. Actions speak louder than words, son. This suggests you're choosing the harder but better path. There's something else, Trent added, reaching into his pocket to produce the challenge coin Hawk had given him. I had this put on a chain. I'm wearing it every day as a reminder. He pulled aside his collar to show the coin hanging around his neck. My grandfather was in Vietnam too. We weren't close, and I never really understood what his service meant. I think that's part of why I didn't recognize what your cap and medals represented. It's no excuse, but understanding our blind spots is essential to addressing them, Hawk replied. Have you spoken with your grandfather since yesterday? Trent nodded. For the first time in years. He saw the news and called me. We talked for hours. He's going to come with me to the VA when I start volunteering. This unexpected development, a fractured family relationship potentially healing through this difficult experience, struck Hawk as the most positive outcome yet. Sometimes, our greatest failures can lead to our most important reconciliations. Don't waste this opportunity. As Trent departed, visibly moved by the exchange, James resumed wheeling his grandfather toward his room. That was unexpected, he observed. Do you think he's sincere? Time will tell, Hawk replied, but I believe he's genuinely shaken by what happened. Not just the consequences, but the recognition of something lacking in himself. That's fertile ground for change. Upon returning to his room, Hawk found several members of Senator Mitchell's staff waiting with preparations for his potential congressional testimony. The senator had moved quickly, scheduling the hearing for just 2 weeks later to capitalize on the public attention currently focused on veterans' issues. We understand you're still recovering, Master Sergeant, the legislative director explained, but we wanted to give you these briefing materials early so you can prepare at your own pace. The materials included statistics on veterans' experiences in public spaces, policy proposals being considered, and statements from business associations and veterans groups. The scope was broader than Hawk had anticipated, addressing not just instances of disrespect, but systematic challenges aging veterans faced in navigating public spaces. The senator believes your testimony could help humanize these issues, the staff member continued. We're not asking you to be political, just to share your experience and perspective as someone who's lived these challenges. After they departed, Hawk spent the afternoon reviewing the materials while James fielded calls and messages that continued to pour in from across the country. Veterans organizations were organizing rallies in support of the proposed legislation. Military family support groups were sharing resources for businesses on how to better accommodate elderly or disabled veterans. By evening, exhaustion had set in, and Hawk's discomfort was visible despite his attempts to hide it. Dr. Reeves, making her final rounds for the day, noted his fatigue and adjusted his pain medication. You've had quite a day for someone who's supposed to be resting, she observed with gentle reproach. Tomorrow we'll need to be more strict about limiting visitors. Doctor, Hawk replied with a tired smile, I think that horse has left the barn. Nevertheless, she insisted, your recovery needs to take priority. I'm posting a nurse outside your door with strict instructions. After she left, James helped his grandfather prepare for sleep. As he was about to leave for the night, Hawk called him back. James, what do you think about all this? The medal, the congressional testimony, the media attention. Does it feel excessive to you? James considered the question thoughtfully. I think it feels excessive to you because you've never sought recognition. But from where I stand, it seems like the right response at the right time. How so? The country needs this conversation, Grandpa. We've been at war for over 20 years, creating a new generation of veterans while our Vietnam veterans are aging and facing new challenges. Your experience bridges those worlds in a way that resonates with people. Hawk nodded slowly. I just don't want to become a symbol that oversimplifies complex issues. Then don't let that happen, James replied simply. Be as nuanced and thoughtful in your testimony as you've always been in your life. Trust yourself to tell the truth as you see it. Uday! The next morning brought a surprising development. Dr. Reeves arrived with news that Hawk's story had reached the White House. The President had directed the Secretary of Veterans Affairs to expedite new guidelines for businesses on accommodating aging veterans, using recommendations from the Veterans Crisis Response Network as a starting point. They're calling it the Hawkins Protocol, Dr. Reeves explained, showing Hawk the press release on her tablet, a comprehensive approach to ensuring dignity and accessibility for veterans in public and commercial spaces. Hawk read the announcement. With mixed emotions, I never expected my name to be attached to a policy initiative. It's a powerful symbol, Dr. Reeves noted, and in this case, the substance appears to match the symbolism. These are solid, practical guidelines that businesses can implement without undue burden. Later that morning, General Kearney returned with unexpected news of his own. The mall incident had catalyzed significant private sector interest in supporting the Veterans Crisis Response Network. Several major corporations had pledged funding to expand its operations nationwide. We've been operating on a shoestring budget for years, Kearney explained. Now we'll be able to establish response teams in every major metropolitan area, train shopping centers and entertainment venues on proper interaction with veterans, and create rapid intervention protocols for situations like yours. All this, from one shove in a shopping mall, Hawk marveled, still struggling to comprehend the cascading effects of what had seemed like a personal indignity. The incident was the spark, Kearney acknowledged, but the kindling was already there. Americans want to do right by their veterans. They sometimes just need a reminder of what that looks like in practical terms. As his hospital stay stretched into its third day, Hawk began working with a physical therapist to ensure his mobility wouldn't be compromised by the injuries. The new temporary prosthetic was more comfortable than he had expected, though he still approached it with the wariness of someone who had relied on the same technology for decades. You've adapted remarkably well, the therapist observed as Hawk navigated the hospital corridor with his walker. Many patients half your age struggle more with temporary prosthetics. I've had practice, Hawk replied modestly. When you lose a limb in a jungle halfway around the world, you learn to adapt quickly or you don't survive. The therapist, a young woman who specialized in working with combat-injured veterans, regarded him with professional interest. Would you consider speaking to some of our younger amputees? We have several recently returned from Afghanistan who are having difficulty adjusting. The request gave Hawk pause. He had done similar work decades ago at Walter Reed, as Margaret Sullivan had reminded him, but hadn't considered that his experience might still be relevant to modern soldiers with access to advanced medical care and technology he could only have dreamed of. In 1970, their challenges are different from what I faced, he pointed out. Better prosthetics, better rehabilitation protocols. The technology changes, the therapist acknowledged, but the psychological adjustment doesn't. Learning to See yourself as whole despite physical changes, adapting your sense of identity, finding purpose beyond your injury. Those challenges are timeless. Hawk agreed to meet with a small group of younger veterans that afternoon. In a conference room near the rehabilitation center, he found himself face to face with 4 men and 2 women, all under 30, all adjusting to life with prosthetic limbs. After combat injuries in the Middle East and Afghanistan, the generational gap was immediately apparent in their technology. Smartphones, tablets, advanced prosthetics with microprocessors and articulated joints that would have seemed like science fiction during Hawk's recovery. Yet as they began to share their experiences, the commonalities quickly overshadowed the differences. "The hardest part isn't physical," admitted a former Army Ranger who had lost both legs to an IED. "It's the stares, the awkward questions, the way some people treat you like you're suddenly incapable of basic functions." Hawk nodded in understanding. "That hasn't changed in 50 years. People see the missing limb, not the whole person." "How did you deal with it?" asked one of the women, a Marine who had lost her left arm below the elbow during a helicopter crash. "Without punching someone, I mean." A knowing chuckle circulated among the group, acknowledging the sometimes overwhelming frustration they all had experienced. "I found that how I carried myself determined how others treated me," Hawk replied. "If I projected confidence and capability, most people took their cues from that. Not everyone, as we saw at the mall, but most." The conversation flowed naturally, touching on practical coping strategies, navigating civilian life, and maintaining the sense of purpose that military service had provided. Hawk shared candidly about his difficult early years after Vietnam, including struggles with pain medication and the challenge of finding employment. "One thing I learned," he told them, "is that resilience isn't about never falling. It's about how you rise after each fall, sometimes literally, as in my case at the mall." His self-deprecating humor broke the tension that had been building as they discussed more difficult topics. The younger veterans laughed, and Hawk saw in their eyes something he recognized from his own experience: the relief of speaking with someone who truly understood their journey. As the session concluded, the Marine who had asked about dealing with public reactions approached Hawk privately. "Master Sergeant, would you mind if I recorded a short video message from you for our Veterans Support Group online? What happened to you at the mall has started important conversations in our community." Hawk hesitated briefly, still uncomfortable with the public attention, but increasingly aware of the positive impact his experience was having. "What kind of message did you have in mind?" "Just some words of wisdom from someone who's walked this road decades longer than we have," she replied. "Something to remind us that the challenges we face now don't define our entire future." Put that way, Hawk couldn't refuse. As James set up the smartphone to record, Hawk gathered his thoughts, wanting to offer something more substantive than platitudes. When the recording began, he spoke simply and directly. "To my fellow travelers on this journey of adaptation and resilience, I won't tell you it gets easy. The phantom pain, the practical challenges, the occasional ignorance you'll encounter, these don't disappear entirely, but I can tell you from the perspective of 50 years that they do become manageable." He gestured to his temporary prosthetic. "This isn't the limb I lost in Vietnam. That's long gone. It's the 4th major prosthetic I've used over decades. Each was better than the last, just as each year brought new skills and adaptations I couldn't have imagined when I first woke up in that field hospital." Leaning slightly forward, his expression earnest, Hawk continued, "The most important prosthetic isn't the one attached to your body. It's the one you build in your mind, the resilient identity that incorporates your experience rather than being defined by it. That's the true adaptive equipment, and it's something each of you is already building, whether you realize it or not." As the video ended, The Marine's eyes shone with emotion. "That's exactly what we needed to hear, Master Sergeant. Thank you." The video would later be viewed over 2 million times across various social media platforms, shared by veterans, groups, medical professionals, and rehabilitation centers worldwide. Its simple authenticity cut through the noise of more polished but less genuine messaging about recovery and resilience. On the 4th day of his hospital stay, Hawk was cleared for discharge. His injuries were healing well, and the medical team was satisfied that he could continue his recovery at home with regular outpatient therapy. James arrived early to assist with the discharge process, bringing news that their family had been fielding calls from media outlets around the country. "Everyone wants an exclusive interview," James explained, as he helped his grandfather pack the surprising accumulation of gifts, cards, and mementos that had arrived during his stay. The major networks, cable news, morning shows, even some international outlets. Hawk shook his head, still uncomfortable with the attention. "I'm testifying before Congress in 10 days. Isn't that enough?" "It's your call, Grandpa. No one would blame you for declining, but these interviews could help shape the national conversation in a positive way." Before Hawk could respond, there was a knock at the door. Dr. Reeves entered, with final discharge instructions and an unexpected suggestion. "Master Sergeant, before you leave, I wanted to propose something. The VA is establishing a new patient advocacy program specifically for elderly veterans navigating our health system. Given your recent experience and the respect you command, would you consider serving as a special advisor to the program?" The request caught Hawk by surprise. "I'm not sure what I could contribute, Doctor. I'm not a healthcare professional." "That's precisely why we need you," Dr. Reeves explained. "We have plenty of medical expertise. What we need is the perspective of someone who understands the veteran experience from the inside out, someone who can help us see blind spots in our systems and processes." As Hawk considered the offer, she continued, "It wouldn't be demanding, perhaps a few hours each month for meetings and document review, but your input could help us improve care for thousands of aging veterans." The prospect of contributing in such a tangible way appealed to Hawk far more than media appearances or symbolic recognition. "In that case, I'd be honored to help, Doctor." As they completed the discharge process, General Kearney arrived to coordinate Hawk's transportation home. The general had arranged for a discreet exit through a private entrance to avoid the small group of reporters who had gathered near the main hospital doors. "The media attention will fade eventually," Kearney assured him as they made their way through the hospital corridors. "But the impact of what's happened, the policy changes, the increased awareness, the connections being formed, those will endure." Hawk nodded thoughtfully. "I'm beginning to understand that this was never really about me. I was just in the right place at the wrong time." "Or perhaps," Kearney suggested with a slight smile, "the right place at exactly the right time." As they reached the private exit where a government SUV waited, Hawk paused to look back at the hospital that had been his temporary home during this unexpected chapter of his life. In the lobby beyond the security doors, he could see other veterans, some his age, others from more recent conflicts, making their way to appointments or treatments. In that moment, Hawk felt the weight of representation settle more comfortably on his shoulders. If his experience could help improve their journey in even small ways, then the discomfort of public attention was a price worth paying. The path forward was clear. He would testify before Congress, he would advise the VA program, and he would continue to share his story, not for personal recognition, but for the broader purpose it now served. "You're right, Bill," he said to General Kearney as they moved toward the waiting vehicle. "Right place, right time. Let's make the most of it." 12 days later, Edwin Hawkins sat before the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee, his testimony broadcast live on multiple networks and streaming platforms. The hearing room was filled to capacity with veterans groups, business representatives and policy experts waiting to provide additional testimony after Hawk's opening statement. Hawk adjusted the microphone slightly, his weathered hands steady as he prepared to address the committee. The challenge coin that had once been tucked in his pocket now hung from a chain around his neck, a gift from his fellow veterans at the hospital, crafted to match the one he had given Trent Morris. "Mr. Chairman, distinguished committee members," he began, his voice clear and unwavering, "I come before you not as a hero or a victim, but as a messenger. What happened to me at Westfield Plaza Mall could have happened to any elderly veteran on any day in any town across America. The only difference is that someone was recording and someone knew who to call." He gestured to the packed gallery behind him. "For every veteran seated in this room, thousands more are watching, hoping that their daily challenges navigating public spaces will finally be understood and addressed. They don't want special treatment. They want the respect and consideration they've earned through service to this nation." As Hawk continued his testimony, weaving personal experience with broader insights about the veteran community, he embodied the dignity and wisdom that had made his mall encounter so powerful. The medals on his jacket caught the light as he leaned forward to make key points, physical reminders of sacrifices made decades ago that still shaped his identity and purpose. The Hawkins Protocol being developed by the Department of Veterans Affairs is a promising start, he acknowledged, but legislation alone cannot create the cultural shift we need. That must come from communities, businesses, and individual citizens, choosing to see veterans not as symbols or stereotypes, but as neighbors and fellow citizens continuing their contribution to society long after hanging up the uniform. The audience, General Kearney sat alongside Lieutenant Commander James Hawkins, both men watching with quiet pride as Hawk delivered the most important briefing of his long service to the nation, not on battlefield tactics or enemy positions, but on the fundamental values that made such service meaningful. Seated nearby was Trent Morris, the security guard whose actions had inadvertently sparked this national conversation. He listened intently, the challenge coin visible against his shirt, his expression reflecting the profound impact of his unexpected role in this unfolding story. As Hawk concluded his testimony, he offered the committee and the nation watching a simple but powerful challenge. The measure of a society isn't found in how it honors its heroes with parades and monuments, but in how it treats its veterans. In the mundane moments of daily life, at shopping malls, doctors' offices, government buildings, and public transportation. That's where respect becomes real, where gratitude becomes practical, and where we truly demonstrate whether we understand the meaning of "leave no one behind." The applause that followed wasn't just for Hawk's words, but for the lifetime of service they represented, service that had begun in the jungles of Vietnam and continued now in the marble halls of Congress, bridging generations of veterans with a timeless message about dignity, respect, and the enduring bonds of those who have worn the uniform. As Hawk looked out at the sea of faces, young and old, military and civilian, powerful and ordinary, he felt something he hadn't experienced since his days leading men in combat, the profound satisfaction of a mission that mattered, executed with precision and purpose, with impacts that would ripple far beyond what he could see or measure. For an old soldier who had never sought the spotlight, it was perhaps his most important deployment of all. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.